In the shadow of the aging and paranoid Emperor Tiberius, Rome held its breath, a city suffocating under a reign of terror and suspicion. Upon Tiberius's death, a wave of collective relief washed over the empire as his chosen heir, Gaius Caesar, known affectionately as Caligula, ascended to the throne. The first months of Caligula's reign were a golden age of promise. He was generous, just, and beloved by the people and the army alike. But a severe illness struck the young emperor, a fever that ravaged his body and, as history would suggest, shattered his mind completely. He emerged from his sickness a changed man, a monster cloaked in purple, his eyes burning with a new, terrifying paranoia. His first act of this new reign was to force his young cousin and co-heir, Gemellus, to take his own life. The boy, so unaccustomed to violence, had to be shown by a soldier how to hold the sword to his own throat, his tears mixing with the blood that soon spilled onto the marble floor. It was a clear message to all. Loyalty was worthless, and family ties were merely ropes for the gallows. Caligula's paranoia became a weapon of mass destruction aimed at the Senate. He revived treason trials, not for justice, but for sport and profit. Senators who had once celebrated his ascension were now dragged from their homes in the dead of night, their pleas for mercy met with the emperor's mocking laughter as they faced summary execution. To further humiliate the once proud aristocracy, he would force high-ranking senators to run for miles beside his chariot like common slaves. Dressed in their finest togas, these old, dignified men would gasp for air, their faces turning purple as they struggled to keep pace, their exhaustion and degradation a source of immense pleasure for the emperor who watched them suffer. Caligula's depravity knew no bounds, extending even to his own sisters. He engaged in incestuous relationships with all three of them, but his obsession was with his favorite, Drusilla. He paraded her around not as a sibling, but as a wife, shattering every Roman moral taboo and daring anyone to challenge his divine right to do as he pleased. When Drusilla died suddenly from a fever, Caligula's grief twisted into a terrifying nationwide mandate of sorrow. He declared her a goddess, Panthea, and made public mourning compulsory on pain of death. A man who dared to laugh, a family who dared to dine together, all were condemned for disrespecting his divine sister, their lives forfeit to his insane grief. The treasury, once filled by Tiberius's careful management, was rapidly emptied by Caligula's lavish spending and grotesque projects. To refill his coffers, he turned to systematic extortion. He declared that all wealthy citizens must name him as a beneficiary in their wills, and then, to speed up his inheritance, he would invent treason charges and have them promptly killed. He transformed the imperial palace into a brothel, forcing the wives and daughters of senators to serve as prostitutes. He would personally invite the men to the palace, watch them with their families, and then auction off their female relatives to the highest bidder, often participating himself. Each act was a calculated degradation, a way to prove that everything and everyone belonged to him. His megalomania reached its zenith with the construction of a 2-mile floating bridge across the Bay of Bay. Using thousands of requisitioned merchant ships, he created a pointless pontoon bridge, paved it, and then spent 2 days riding back and forth across it in the armor of Alexander the Great. This monument to his own ego starved the city of Rome, as the grain ships used in its construction never arrived, causing widespread famine. Not content with being an emperor, Caligula declared himself a living god, Neo's Helios, the new sun. He had the heads of famous statues of gods, including Jupiter, removed and replaced with likenesses of his own. He would sit in temples, dressed as various deities, and demand that senators and foreign kings alike prostrate themselves and worship him, their lives hanging on the whim of his divine mood. His love for his horse, Incitatus, bordered on the insane. The horse lived in a marble stable, ate oats mixed with gold flakes from an ivory manger, and was attended by a retinue of slaves. Caligula famously announced his intention to make Incitatus a consul, the highest office in Rome. This was not just madness. It was the ultimate insult to the Senate, declaring that his horse was more worthy of power than any of them. In a display of military absurdity, Caligula marched his legions to the northern coast of Gaul, supposedly to invade Britain. The invasion never happened. Instead, he declared war on the sea itself, ordering his soldiers to charge into the waves and attack the water with their swords. Their reward for this victory was to be a collection of seashells, which he called the spoils of the ocean. His religious fanaticism almost sparked a massive revolt in the East. He ordered a colossal golden statue of himself to be erected in the sacred temple of Jerusalem, an act of sacrilege that would have certainly led to a bloody war. Only the cautious maneuvering of his officials and his timely death prevented this catastrophe, a hair's breadth away from drenching a holy site in blood. The breaking point for the Praetorian Guard came not from his grand cruelties, but from his petty, daily humiliations. He would taunt their prefect, Cassius Chaerea, an old and respected soldier, with obscene passwords and demeaning insults about his supposedly effeminate voice. This constant chipping away at a good man's dignity planted the seeds of a conspiracy that would end in blood. On the 24th of January, in the year 41, during the Palatine Games, the conspirators struck. As Caligula walked through a secluded palace corridor, Chaerea confronted him. After a heated exchange, Chaerea struck the first blow, a sword thrust that gashed the emperor's jaw. It was the signal for the others to descend. The other guards swarmed in, a frenzy of steel and vengeance. They stabbed him again and again, over 30 times, long after he was dead. They were not just killing a man, they were annihilating a symbol, a god they had been forced to worship. The marble walls of the corridor were slick with the blood of the tyrant. The assassins' rage was not sated by the emperor's death. They hunted down his wife, Caesonia, a woman as cruel as her husband, and stabbed her to death. Their final, most chilling act was to find Caligula's infant daughter, Julia Drusilla. They took the terrified child and smashed her head against a wall, extinguishing the tyrant's bloodline with one horrific, final blow. In the chaos that followed Caligula's assassination, the Praetorian Guard found his uncle, Claudius, hiding behind a curtain, trembling in fear for his life. In a strange twist of fate, instead of killing him, they declared him the new emperor. Rome had traded a confident monster for a stammering, fearful scholar, hoping for a respite from the madness. For a time, they got it. Claudius's reign, while fraught with its own betrayals and executions, brought a semblance of stability. But his greatest weakness was his choice of wives, particularly his niece, Agrippina the Younger. Ambitious, ruthless, and power-hungry, she manipulated the aging Claudius into adopting her son from a previous marriage, a boy named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, who would come to be known as Nero. Agrippina's ambition could not wait for nature to take its course. To secure the throne for her son, she murdered her husband, the Emperor Claudius. She served him a dish of his favorite mushrooms, laced with a deadly poison. As he writhed in agony, she smothered him with a feather, ensuring her son, Nero, would be the sole heir to the Roman world. At just 16, Nero became emperor, his early reign guided by his mother and two able advisors, the Stoic philosopher Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. This period, known as the 5 Good Years, was marked by competent governance and relative peace. But beneath the surface, a young man's ego was being nurtured, and a monster was waiting to be unleashed from his mother's shadow. Nero's first major challenge came from his stepbrother, Britannicus, the true son of Claudius and a potential rival for the throne. At a dinner party in full view of the court, Nero acted. A poisoner named Locusta was hired, and a drink was prepared. The first cup was too hot, so when cold, poisoned water was added to cool it, Britannicus drank it down without suspicion. The poison worked instantly and horribly. Britannicus began to convulse, foaming at the mouth as he choked for air, his life extinguishing before the horrified eyes of the dinner guests. Nero calmly explained that his stepbrother was merely having an epileptic fit, a condition he had suffered since childhood. The boy's body was carried out and burned on a pyre that same night, his murder a chilling declaration of Nero's ruthlessness. As Nero grew older, his mother Agrippina's iron grip began to feel like a cage. She openly disapproved of his affair with Poppaea Sabina and constantly reminded him that she was the one who had given him the throne. Her threats to support Britannicus had sealed the boy's fate, and now her continued attempts to control her son would seal her own. Nero decided his mother had to die, but he wanted the murder to look like an accident. He commissioned the construction of a special boat, designed to collapse at sea. He invited Agrippina to a cordial dinner, showered her with affection, and then sent her off on the vessel, bidding her a fond farewell as she sailed into the dark, waiting waters. Out on the bay, the mechanism was triggered. The lead-lined canopy of the cabin crashed down, but Agrippina was saved when the couch she was reclining on broke the impact. As the boat disintegrated, she and her maid were thrown into the water. In the chaos, the assassins, mistaking the panicked maid for the empress, beat her to death with their oars. Agrippina, a strong swimmer, managed to escape and was picked up by a fishing boat. She knew immediately that her son had tried to kill her. In a last, desperate gamble, she sent a messenger to Nero, calmly informing him that she had survived the terrible accident. This act of defiance enraged Nero, who now knew that subtlety had failed. Panicked and furious, Nero abandoned all pretense. He dispatched his assassins with a direct order: finish the job. They found Agrippina in her villa. When they entered her bedroom with swords drawn, she knew her time was up. Baring her abdomen, she famously cried out, "Strike the womb that bore such a monster." They showed no mercy, cutting her down with brutal efficiency. Nero, it is said, came to view his mother's corpse, callously commenting on the beauty of her dead body, unmoved by the matricide he had just committed. He was now free from her control, but he would be haunted by her ghost for the rest of his miserable life. With his mother gone, Nero's true passions were unleashed. He fancied himself a great artist, a poet, a singer, and a lyre player. He began performing in public, a shocking breach of decorum for an emperor. The Roman elite were forced to attend his hours-long recitals, forbidden to leave even for emergencies, trapped by the terrible performances of their all-powerful ruler. His personal life was a string of cruelties. He divorced his popular wife, Octavia, Claudius's daughter, on false charges of adultery and banished her. When the public protested, he panicked and ordered her execution. Her veins were cut, but she was so terrified that the blood would not flow properly. She was then suffocated in a vapor bath, her head cut off and delivered to his new wife, Poppaea. His marriage to Poppaea was no less violent. During a petty argument, in a fit of rage, Nero kicked his pregnant wife in the stomach. The blow was so severe that it killed both her and their unborn child. His remorse was fleeting and theatrical, another performance for an empire that was growing weary of his bloody, unpredictable passions. In the summer of the year 64, disaster struck Rome. A fire began in the merchant shops around the Circus Maximus, and fanned by a strong wind, it raged for 6 days. It consumed vast swathes of the city, destroying thousands of homes, temples, and public buildings. The city of marble was reduced to a smoldering ruin, its people left homeless and destitute. A rumor, impossible to prove but too terrible to ignore, spread like the fire itself, that the Emperor Nero had watched the city burn from his palace. It was said that he was dressed in theatrical costume and played his lyre, singing about the fall of Troy as his own city turned to ash. The story cemented his image as a monster, completely detached from the suffering of his people. Whether he started the fire or not, Nero needed a scapegoat to deflect the public's fury. He found one in a small, misunderstood religious sect known as the Christians. This group, already distrusted for their strange customs and secret meetings, was an easy target for an emperor desperate to redirect blame. The persecution that followed was a spectacle of unimaginable cruelty. Nero's sadism was given free rein. Some Christians were crucified. Others were dressed in animal skins and thrown into the arena to be torn apart by wild dogs for the entertainment of the masses. Their screams of agony were drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Perhaps the most horrific fate was reserved for those used to illuminate Nero's garden parties. Christians were tied to stakes, covered in pitch and tar, and set ablaze. These human torches lit up the night, their agonizing screams providing the soundtrack to the emperor's lavish festivities. Nero himself would reportedly drive his chariot among the burning victims, enjoying the grisly display he had orchestrated. On the vast, fire-cleared land in the center of Rome, Nero began construction of his ultimate monument to self-indulgence, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. It was a sprawling palace complex with acres of landscaped gardens, an artificial lake, and a colossal 100-foot-tall bronze statue of himself. This extravagant project, built on the ashes of his people's homes, was funded by looting the temples of Italy and the provinces. Nero's tyranny and extravagance finally pushed the Roman aristocracy too far. In the year 65, a widespread conspiracy was formed, led by a senator named Gaius Calpurnius Piso. The plan was to assassinate Nero and make Piso the new emperor. The plot involved senators, equestrians, and even officers of Nero's own Praetorian Guard. The Pisonian conspiracy was betrayed before it could be carried out. Nero's response was swift and merciless. A new wave of terror swept through Rome as informants and torturers went to work. Accusations, often baseless, were enough to condemn a man. It was a bloodbath of the Roman elite, a purge designed to eliminate anyone with a hint of opposition. Among the victims was Nero's old tutor, the philosopher Seneca. Though his involvement was uncertain, he was ordered to commit suicide. Following Stoic tradition, Seneca opened his veins, but due to his age and simple diet, the blood flowed too slowly. He endured a long, agonizing death, calmly dictating his final thoughts to his scribes as he bled out, a final act of philosophical defiance against a monstrous former pupil. The purges continued, consuming anyone Nero suspected. The poet Lucan, Petronius the arbiter of elegance, and countless others were forced to take their own lives. Rome's brightest and best were systematically eliminated, their wealth confiscated by the emperor. The city was a charnel house, where death could come at any moment, delivered by a messenger with an imperial command. Finally, the empire itself began to turn on him. In March of 68, the governor of Gaul, Gaius Julius Vindex, openly revolted against Nero's tyranny. Though his rebellion was put down, it was the spark that lit the fire. Soon after, Servius Sulpicius Galba, the governor of Spain, also declared his opposition and was hailed as emperor by his legions. Nero's support evaporated overnight. The Praetorian Guard, bribed by Galba's agents, abandoned their emperor. The Senate, smelling blood in the water, quickly declared Nero a public enemy to be executed by flogging. The master of Rome was suddenly a hunted fugitive in his own city, his world collapsing around him in a matter of days. He fled the palace in disguise, taking refuge in the villa of one of his freedmen just outside the city. He was a pathetic figure, tormented by fear and indecision, unable to take his own life. As he heard the sound of approaching horsemen coming to arrest him, he knew his time was up. With the help of his loyal secretary, Epaphroditos, Nero placed a dagger to his throat. Even then, he hesitated, weeping and lamenting his fate. Finally, as the soldiers closed in, he forced his secretary to push the blade home. His last words, uttered as his lifeblood soaked into the dirt, were qualis artifex perio, what an artist dies in me. The death of Nero marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a line of rulers that had descended from the divine Augustus into the depths of depravity. The reigns of Caligula and Nero were not just political failures. They were psychological horrors, cautionary tales of what happens when absolute power is given to men with fractured minds and blackened souls. Their victims were not mere statistics in a history book. They were senators and soldiers, mothers and children, nobles and slaves. They were the ones who paid the price for the emperor's whims, their lives extinguished in a spectacle of torture, execution, and unimaginable cruelty. Their screams were the true soundtrack of these reigns, a symphony of suffering conducted by madmen. Caligula's brief, explosive reign served as a terrifying prelude, a demonstration of how quickly the veneer of Roman civilization could be stripped away by one man's insanity. He turned the state into his personal playground and its people into his toys, to be broken at his leisure. He challenged the gods and declared himself their equal, a blasphemy paid for with the blood of his subjects. Nero, on the other hand, was a more complex monster, a tyrant with the soul of a performer. His cruelty was often theatrical, his murders staged like scenes in a grand, bloody play. He did not just want to kill his enemies, he wanted to orchestrate their deaths, to turn their final moments into a spectacle for his own amusement, blurring the line between art and atrocity. The terror of Caligula's treason trials left the Senate permanently scarred, transforming it from a body of proud statesmen into a den of terrified sycophants. Men who once governed provinces and commanded legions were reduced to trembling subjects, applauding the emperor's insanities and praying they would not be the next to be named. This degradation of the ruling class rotted the empire from the inside out. The story of Drusilla's deification is a chilling look into a mind unmoored from reality. By forcing a nation to worship his dead sister and lover, Caligula was not just grieving. He was remaking religion in his own twisted image. He was asserting that his personal relationships and his personal pain were matters of state divinity, and that all of Rome must share in his delusion or die. Nero's murder of Britannicus was a cold and calculated political move, but it was also a deeply personal one. It was the moment the teenage emperor tasted the ultimate power, the power to erase a rival with a sip of wine. This first, easy murder set a precedent, teaching him that killing was the simplest solution to any problem, a lesson he would apply to his mother, his wives, and his people. The repeated, almost farcical attempts to murder Agrippina show Nero's strange mix of cowardice and cruelty. He could not simply order her death. He needed the illusion of an accident, the thin veil of deniability. Yet when his clever plots failed, his frustration exploded into blunt, savage violence. This duality defined his reign, the elaborate, artistic scheme followed by the crude, brutal reality of the sword. The great fire of Rome became Nero's dark canvas. On the ashes of the old city, he built his Domus Aurea, a personal paradise that flaunted his detachment from the common man. It was a golden palace built with the tears of a homeless populace, a physical manifestation of his belief that the entire world existed purely for his pleasure and glorification. The persecution of the Christians was a masterclass in political misdirection, but it was also an outlet for a deep-seated sadism. Nero did not just execute them, he tortured them in ways designed to maximize public spectacle and horror. The human torches were not just executions, they were a form of hellish decoration, a depraved fusion of public works and mass murder that revealed the true depths of his monstrosity. The end of Nero was not heroic. It was the pathetic whimpering of a cornered animal. The man who had commanded the world, who saw himself as a god-tier artist, could not even find the courage to end his own life without assistance. His final words about the artist dying were not a profound statement, but the ultimate expression of his narcissism, lamenting the loss of himself even as his failures had plunged the empire into civil war. The legacies of Caligula and Nero are a scar on the history of Rome, a permanent reminder that civilization is a fragile construct, easily shattered by the pathology of its leaders. They were not just cruel rulers, they were forces of chaos, their reigns a fever dream of blood, fire, and madness from which the empire would never fully recover, setting the stage for a century of instability and civil war. Caligula's madness may have been sparked by illness, but it was fed by the absolute power he wielded. Every sycophant who bowed to him, every senator who tolerated his humiliations, and every guard who carried out his insane orders was complicit. His reign demonstrated a terrifying truth. A single madman on a throne is dangerous, but he is only made truly monstrous by the silent consent of those around him. The sheer wastefulness of Caligula's projects, like the Bridge of Baiae, went beyond fiscal irresponsibility. It was a declaration that the resources of the entire empire and the lives of its people were meaningless compared to his desire to prove a point. The famine his bridge caused was not an unfortunate side effect. It was an acceptable price for a two-day theatrical performance of his own greatness. Nero's relationship with art was a perversion of creativity. He did not want to create for humanity. He wanted humanity to be his captive audience. His forced recitals were a form of psychological warfare, where the artistic sensibilities of an entire class of people were held hostage. To criticize his art was treason, making aesthetic judgment a matter of life and death. The fall of Octavia is a story of profound injustice. She was a symbol of legitimacy, the daughter of the deified Claudius, and a link to a more stable past. By divorcing and murdering her on fabricated charges, Nero was not just committing a personal cruelty. He was severing his last tie to republican tradition and declaring that his own desires were the only law that mattered. The Pisonian conspiracy's failure unleashed a new kind of terror. Unlike Caligula's random rages, Nero's purge was systematic and cold. He used the conspiracy as an excuse to eliminate every potential threat, every independent thinker, and every wealthy man whose property he coveted. It was a calculated slaughter, a final, bloody consolidation of his absolute and terrifying power. In the end, the stories of Caligula and Nero are more than just historical accounts. They are archetypes of tyranny. They are a chilling exploration of the human capacity for cruelty when all restraints, moral, social, and political, are removed. Their reigns stand as a permanent, blood-red warning in the annals of history, a testament to the darkness that can consume a man and an empire from the throne.